The key to great sex, the key to great open relationships, and the key to long-lasting passion in a monogamous marriage as well, all of those, the way I would say it, is they are the excellence in all of those areas are contingent on, at least to some degree, having a growth mindset. In other words, being open to learn and grow and understand that as life happens, we can evolve and meet the circumstances differently, because there is nothing inherently worse about sex in your 50s, 60s, or 70s.
Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. Today is episode number 126, Menopause, Men, and Happiness, Navigating This Time with Your Partner. Now, today is more of a tactical conversation. It's how do we continue to have amazing sex while we're in menopause? How do we support people in our lives that are going through menopause? And how do we have difficult conversations around menopause, or even having a conversation? And we also talk about Dr. Alexandra's beautiful book, The Invitation: Vital Conversations About Menopause. If you haven't listened to part 1, I recommend that you just go ahead and pause this, head over to episode 125, so at least you get the beginning part of this conversation, and then hop back into this one. Welcome to the Open Bedroom Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Kalo. Welcome to conversations about open relationships, online dating, conscious uncoupling, and creating the relationship that truly aligns for you.
There's nothing inherently worse about sex in your 50s, 60s, or 70s. In fact, the research is very clear that women's sexuality peaks in our late 60s and early 70s, if we're not in the 51% who aren't having sex. In other words, it does not have to be worse. It's just going to be different. So if you have what in this context I'll call a fixed mindset, and have the belief that the best sex of your life requires a 25-year-old body, and it's only downhill from there, then yeah, menopausal sex is gonna suck. But it's not because of menopause. It's because of the societal conditioning and an inadequate mindset to meet what life brings.
This is so yummy. So I feel like we've been talking big picture. We've been talking men, even big picture, like how you can support, and it's all kind of generalities, right? I'd love to talk tactics. That's kind of my favorite thing. So if you're a woman and you're listening to this and you're about to go through menopause, you're going through menopause, you're like, yes, holler, Alexandra, I'm totally there with you. I'm here. Now what? Like, I don't want my sex life to be non-existent. I don't want to be uncomfortable in my body. I don't want this. I'm fighting it, whatever it is, or I feel like, I'm a victim, or I feel betrayed by my body. Like, what are the tactical things that you can do? Like, the first thing that I would think is like, how can I still stay plugged into sex and plugged into my partner? I'm like, what does my body need? Do I need like certain lubes? Do I need a different way to get turned on? Do I need a different sex position? I don't even know, where do you start? Is there like a checklist?
Okay, well, yeah. So everything I say now, I intend to be very practical, actionable, and tactical, as you say, but it may sound a little general, and that is because there is not a universal experience of menopause. Like, there really is a total lack of appreciation of the range of what naturally happens in menopause. So I need to speak with that as the context. So if you want to give me a very specific symptom or experience, I'll respond to that. But first, I'm going to do tactical in general terms. So first of all, if you are having physical symptoms, and as I said, I think there are 43 symptoms of menopause. You can look it up, and that's going to include a dry vagina, hot flashes, night sweats, brain fog,
Mm.
fatigue, aching bones, weight gain, low libido, and more, like thinning hair. Like it's a whole range, like all of the different, hormones are so important for homeostasis. And so when our hormones change, it affects all of our organ systems. So I don't know how it affects the liver or the kidneys, but the point is that our skin changes and our memories and capacity to get out of bed in the morning. For some people, it's really variable. In fact, I just want to say that, interestingly, the United Kingdom is way beyond the United States in terms of menopause awareness and services, and particularly in the workplace. And so large companies have like a ombudsman, or an advocate who isn't a coach, isn't a menopause expert, but when a woman has symptoms and there's a way that could be accommodated and helped in the workforce, then she goes to this person in this role at the big company, and they will direct her to whoever is going to actually serve her needs. We interviewed Pat Duckworth, who's an expert in menopause in the workplace, and I have to say it was an incredibly interesting interview. And so in the UK, in a big enough company, if a woman wants a fan on her desk, she just requests it, no shame, no complication. But they're not automatically given to all women when they turn 50. Some people have menopause earlier.
Congratulations, here's your fan.
Yeah, right. But, some women have menopause earlier just physiologically or due to surgical menopause or whatever the case may be. But more importantly, some women would just feel really cold if they had a fan on in their desk. So it really has to be individual. So that's the first thing. Next thing is that if you are having symptoms that really are impeding how you live your life, or it doesn't even have to be that dramatic, just like unpleasant symptoms, then by all means consult a medical practitioner. And one of the travesties of menopause in our society is that there isn't really someone who specializes in menopause. You would think OBs or GYNs or internists or primary care, or endocrinologists. Like there are lots of people lots of physicians whose purview covers each of the symptoms of menopause. But in terms of menopause in general, it's not part of every physician's training. And so there is the North American Menopause Society. You can Google NAMS, and they have a list, I think it's by location, of physicians who've been through their training and been certified. So the first thing that I highly recommend, if you want allopathic support for your symptoms, is go on the North American Menopause Society registry, or website, and find someone in your area who is trained with a menopause focus and understands the range. In fact, I want to add that this, you and I are recording in early mid-September, and I'm not sure exactly when, maybe it's the end of August, the most recent Oprah magazine has 9 pages on menopause. And it's not clear from the cover that that's the case, but there are 9 pages dedicated to menopause in this. And Oprah describes that she had heart palpitations, and so she went to her physician and was given heart medication. But actually, it turns out those heart palpitations, one of the 43 symptoms of menopause, were due to hormonal changes. And so she didn't need heart medication, she needed menopausal care. So you might go to your regular doctor and get what you're looking for, but certainly it's a very common experience that you go to your regular doctor and women feel unheard, and like whatever the response is doesn't really account for their situation. And so if that's the case, I highly recommend getting a physician who is trained in the North American Menopause Society protocols. There are, of course, loads of alternative practitioners who offer various treatment, and um, some of it is scientifically backed, some of it is not. Interestingly, hypnotherapy is one of the modalities which has been well researched as working, if you will. But the main thing is, if it works, it's a good treatment for you. I mean, I'm not saying this as the Surgeon General. I'm saying this as a woman who has spoken with a lot of women who haven't been able to find good care. And when they do and symptoms improve, then that's the right thing for you. So that's one very practical thing. I want to say something that may not sound practical because it doesn't have an acute benefit, but it definitely has a profound benefit. And that is to talk about your experience. Not, you can complain, like complaining has its function. I'm not against complaining, but to really be in dialogue about what your experience is. There's something about having open conversation that is healing, and it gives us a sense of belonging. And one of the most profound elements of menopause, which is not on the list of symptoms, is a sense of loneliness, or kind of being different than how we were and how society rewards us for being. And so any inclination to bury the symptoms, ignore them, feel shame, be lonely, I mean, this really is the context of the book, the invitation, Vital Conversations About Menopause, because having those conversations are so important. And it's important with our partners. It's important with our mothers who have never had these conversations, most likely. It's important with our daughters. It's important with our colleagues and friends. Like, we want to be able to bring our experience into conversation. And yeah, is that going to diminish hot flashes? Is that going to bring your memory back if you've got brain fog? No, of course not. But is that going to open a different relationship to your menopausal journey? Absolutely. And that in and of itself has a very profound impact in overall well-being. I have one more thing that I would put in the sort of not really practical, but tactical category. But do you want to say anything before I do?
Well, what's coming up for me right now is there must be some really good forums and support groups out there for women going through menopause. And I have a friend who had a hysterectomy last year. And at the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned how for a woman, as our body changes and it moves out of, fertility and that phase of being able to bring life into the world, whether or not you do or don't, there's this tie to your womb space. And I think some women feel it much more strongly than others. I don't necessarily feel it that strongly, but my friend does. And my more spiritual woo priestess friends definitely are connected to the moon and their cycles and the da 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 da. And it's been interesting to watch them as they've moved out of the fertility phase and into this, I'm calling it queen archetype, but you can call it whatever.
Okay, we'll take it.
I like the queen. There has been sadness, and I've listened to them and held space for them as they've processed moving out of that phase. And I just, again, I haven't gone through it yet. I feel like I'm perimenopausal at this point, but there has to be support groups, I guess, is my question. Like, have you found anything that people can find? Are there Facebook groups? Like, what does support look like if maybe your friends aren't going through menopause yet, or you can't talk to your mom? Maybe your mom's not alive anymore.
Yeah, that is definitely true for me. I was in my early mid 30s when my mother died. And interestingly, we don't know what our menopausal journey will be like, but a good not guaranteed, but a good predictor is that it will be similar to our mothers. And so one of my regrets is that I never really asked my mother about this. And I knew she was dying before she died. It wasn't sudden. And we talked about all kinds of things, but it just never in my 30s did it occur to me to say, and how was menopause?
Yeah, I'm sure that wasn't on
It
your
just
radar.
didn't cross my
You're trying
mind.
to keep babies alive, you
Yeah.
know?
So, in terms
Mm,
of menopause support groups, I don't actually know that that exists. The only thing that I would say is that there is a growing trend in menopause coaches and midlife coaches for women.
mm,
And I've been interviewed by many of them, and they have, there's a whole range in terms of how much they're focused on fitness and how much on
mhm,
mindset and how much on like eating right for your hormones. But they're like, if you look on Instagram and you look for, or I assume Google, I just haven't, but if you look for on Instagram for a menopause coach or a midlife coach for women, there are loads of them, many with
okay.
big followings. And so if someone is looking for a support circle, I have three recommendations. One is see if there is one virtually or in person near you for sure. I am not in a position to know. Then number two is look for a midlife coach or a menopause coach, or and if they resonate, join their community, join their program, because whether it's called a menopause support group or not, it is one. And then the third thing is start your own. And what that looks like can be so varied. A menopause support group, sure, that can mean sharing about menopausal symptoms and, oh, I tried this and this lube worked. And, actually, I find this position, whatever. You
Mhm,
could do that. But really, from my point of view, the ideal menopause support group is one where you're talking about anything related to vitality, wellness, and purpose. And so sometimes that's going to be the challenges, sometimes that's going to be the dreams, sometimes it's going to be making an action plan. And I think this is a good moment to say what I referred to earlier, because, there's no research on what I'm about to say. But while Trisha and I were talking, having interviewed four different women on the podcast, and some of them told stories about other women. And if you're writing a book about menopause, you end up hearing a lot about people's menopausal journeys. And there are like two trends. One is those who really resist what's happening, who feel that their body is betraying them. Like, you can count on gravity as long as you're not in outer space. And women are used to counting on our bodies behaving in a particular way. And then it's a massive betrayal that can't be any closer to us when our bodies stop functioning in the way we're used to. And it can feel like we want to control our bodies and we're at war with them, and we just need to discipline our bodies so we can get back to the relationship we had before, where our bodies were responsive to our intentions and expectations. And that kind of a menopausal journey, it feels like, regardless of which symptoms there are, if there are any, it just feels like this wave of inconvenience and isolation and suffering.
mhm.
That's one journey, which I think is the main one in the cultural meme, if you add a large sprinkling of dehydrated vagina. The other path forward, which is the one that Trisha and I realized we'd taken, we didn't choose it in advance, is really to know that as humans, we are continuing to evolve. So if this is how my body is changing, how is this happening for me rather than to me? If I embrace growth, and I do in all areas of my life, then this is one where it's time to embrace growth too and to become curious. Okay, so I'm used to my husband and I are naked and I'm wet. Like I have had a very easy time being wet, and I might not always want to have something in my vagina right away, but I certainly could. And now I can't count on that being true all the time, but I'm just curious about it. Okay, so that means it's almost like I need to be more precise in getting to know my physiology and my vagina's desires that are not in my conscious mind. Like I get the fun of almost like a toddler finding its toes. Like the toddler doesn't get annoyed, that I don't know what, I don't know how to finish that sentence. But the point is that, you know, it's an exploration. And when life truly is evolving growth opportunities and you are open to whatever that's going to look like, and I'm not diminishing the symptoms that can be experienced, I'm really focusing on the relationship with those symptoms, that it just seems to be a much less confronting and more peaceful journey.
It feels as you're speaking like very fluid and gentle. And Whitney Miller keeps coming to my mind. You probably don't know Whitney Miller. She's the owner of BDE Moves, like Big Dick Out Energy Moves. She's a queer educator and she does a lot of very practical sex education, especially like women on women sex. And she talks a lot about learning female anatomy and learning cervical elongation and learning when the clitoris is telling you that it's ready for, whatever, and like lubrication and all of that. And she said this one thing about menopause and perimenopause a few weeks ago. And she was like, I have no idea if you agree with this or not. And I brought this up a few times and everyone seems to have a little bit of a controversial reaction, but she said, look, our bodies weren't made to, whether you believe in science or non-science, or like that now science has made us live 120 years. If you look at history, like I think about like Egypt, and granted, there were all these other things happening, but like our bodies were made to like, you know, have children and then die. And so now we're living these really long, robust, amazing lives that are filled with pleasure and curiosity and exploration and, 15 different careers, and whatever you want to be, you can be. And she says, don't be afraid to get support for your hormones. Don't be afraid to ask for support from your doctor. Don't be afraid to talk to your friends and have conversations about this, because our bodies were made to have babies and then die, and it's not happening. And so now there's this whole period in our lives, like decades and decades that we're living, that get to still be filled with pleasure and get to still be very juicy and get to still be delicious. And so why punish yourself also? So one of the other things I've noticed is there's this like group of mindset with women that we shouldn't ask for help and we shouldn't ask for support and we shouldn't go to the doctor and we should never be sick and we shouldn't need self-care and we shouldn't need pleasure. And so I think there's this grouping of women that are like, why would I go to the doctor for menopause? Like, it's just happening. Of course I have hot flashes. Of course I'm miserable. Of course I'm bitchy. Of course I'm dry. Of course I'm all these things. And so I think that the invitation is that you can get hormonal support. You can have, you can lessen the severity of some of these reactions that your body's having because your hormones are changing, which is totally normal. Our bodies are supposed to change as we get older. And I just said a bunch and you're a medical doctor, so now I'm a little bit embarrassed, but I'm curious what you have to say about any of that.
Oh, no. Please don't be embarrassed. I think that there is real wisdom in everything that you just said. And the only thing that I would add is there really is no should. And so if you're someone who previously never took medications or supplementations, then maybe that's who you are. So you go through menopause without doing that. And maybe because you're entering this next phase of your life, you try doing things in a new way. Like maybe you haven't traveled so much and now you want to travel. Maybe you haven't taken any medications before and now you can try your hormone therapy. Like, especially when it comes to vaginal estrogen, like that's like a messy fancy lube essentially, and it makes so much difference in terms of the symptoms. I'm not saying everyone should go out, like I'm not a fan of one size fits all in pretty much anything, including hormones, but I do feel like it would behoove me to say that a lot of women, I don't know if it's necessarily women who are 40, but somewhere in the 45 to 70-year range, we grew up, I'm 55, so we grew up hearing the really bad side effects of hormone replacement therapy and the increased risk of breast cancer and the increased risk of this and that. And so there are a lot of women who are very skittish about taking hormone replacement therapy who aren't, as you've described, natural and don't want, who would be taking other medications. It's just because of this large study. But that really, there were so many errors in that study, and really hormone replacement therapy, when it's warranted, is something that enhances life so much and does not have those negative side effects that were kind of well publicized and like really the way many medical menopause experts, and I'm not one, but the way that many medical menopause experts talk, it's like we've had 20 unnecessary years of suffering for women because of the consequences of this faulty study, and how the conclusions of the faulty study infiltrated not just medical practice, but our societal consciousness. And so there are really great people who are changing that. In fact, I want to, for anyone considering hormones or wanting more information, I have two friends and colleagues to recommend. Dr. Kelly Casperson, her book, You Are Not Broken, her podcast, You Are Not Broken, and her Instagram feed is amazing on all of these topics. And the other person is Dr. Rachel Rubin, who's one of a very small number of physicians who are trained in both male sexual medicine and female sexual medicine. I've interviewed both of them, but Dr. Rachel Rubin, I interviewed just the very end of August. My podcast episode with her came out on my podcast, the Intimate Marriage Podcast. And they're like, you just spend a few minutes on their Instagram feeds, and the whole way that you think about hormones and wellness in menopause will just shift rapidly. And they are both incredibly scientific doctors who are devoted to empowering women with correct information.
Awesome. I will get back to you after we end this with a whole list of things that I need you to help me get links on, because there's like 10 that you've referenced now. Like, read this book.
Well, I'm really glad to do that, because
me too.
I want anyone listening to be thinking about menopause differently, to be interacting with people about your menopause journey and their menopause journey differently, and to have resources for accurate scientific support if that's what somebody is looking for.
I love that. Okay, tell us about you. How can people connect with you? I'm sure after they hear this podcast episode, they're going to be like, I need more Alexandra in my life. Talk about your podcast, talk about your book. Where can they buy it?
Okay, excellent. Well, I'll give you the Amazon link to include in the show notes too. But the name of the book is The Invitation: Vital Conversations About Menopause. And I would love for you to buy it. And please, please leave us a review, because when you leave us a review on Amazon, it makes it more likely that Amazon shows it to other people. And I feel like this is an incredibly important conversation to be having. I want to add that this book is incredibly readable. It doesn't read like a scientific textbook. It is not a medical how-to. It literally is a book consisting of a conversation that Trisha and I had that in so many ways is very similar to the conversation that you and I are having now, Jen. And so that's for the book. And otherwise, alexandrastockwell.com. That's my website. You can find everything there. You can download the first chapter of my book, Uncompromising Intimacy. You can find links to my podcast and all of my social media. And feel free to send me a message. I love interacting and hearing your questions, your observations. Let's dialogue about that. And all of that begins at alexandrastockwell.com.
Fantastic. I'll put the link below. And since we are wrapping up this podcast episode, as soon as we are finished, if you guys would stop and go follow Alexandra, she offers really insightful information. Also, go follow her podcast. It is so refreshing. It makes you feel really good about your own relationship, and she gives really amazing advice and has really great people on the show. So, Alexandra, it was amazing having you on again. This has been such a fun conversation. Who would have thought menopause and fun could be in the same sentence? But I'm excited.
I feel like my work is done. They should be.
Drop. I feel empowered as well as I enter into my own menopause journey, and feel empowered to have conversations with my friends about it. I feel like this is a book you can buy for your best friend, and buy for the lady at work, and buy whatever, like all your girlfriends that are going through it as well. Thank you for stopping and writing a book about this and having the conversation, opening up the dialogue.
Thank you so much. Your responsiveness is always so special.
All right, we'll see you later. Hey there. Did you know that I do online coaching? Yes, I do online coaching in the sex and relationship space. Some of the topics that are near and dear to my heart are open relationships. So that includes polyamory, swinging, or what we call the lifestyle. I also love conversations around online dating. We're talking Bumble, Tinder, Field, and more. And then the last thing that's really passionate and close to my heart is conscious uncoupling. That means we get to break up with people with love and respect, with dignity and hope. We get to create a life for our children that gets to be a little bit different. We can do things better than we have in the past. So if any of these topics sound interesting to you and you'd love to get some coaching from me, check out the link in the show notes or the link in my bio for more information on Coaching with Jen.